7 ways to reduce your freight costs. That's the topic for this week, coming right up. So one of the things that we do in my day job business, which is Logistics Bureau, is helping people with their freight costs, amongst other supply chain things, of course. And over the years, we've developed a little bit of a process to look at particularly 7 aspects of their freight utilization and cost. And I thought I'd share those this week with you so that you can have a look at your own freight utilization and costs and see where you might be able to save money. Before I get into this though, let me stress something that is very important. Freight is a very low margin business generally. And if you are trying to save freight costs, it is very rarely the opportunity to actually reduce the rate per unit. So let's say, for example, you're paying $30 a ton, $40 a pallet or whatever to move your freight. Because it's such a competitive market, it's very often to move the dial on that and go from 48 to 38 and so on. What you need to do is to focus on the task and try to change the task so the task becomes more efficient and you can actually reduce your costs that way. So for the freight company guys watching, don't worry, I'm not about to suggest to people that they come and beat you up over your freight rates, because we all understand it's a very low margin business. You've got to make the task easier and less expensive to carry out. So what are the 7 things we're going to look at? First of all, capacity utilization. I'm actually going on a bit of a road trip in a week or two, and I'll show you some of the vehicles that get used in Australia. I'm actually going into country areas and what we call the outback, way out in the country, where there's some huge vehicles get used, like 4 trailer combinations that carry about 100 tons, I think. And so the first thing is about capacity utilization. Look at the types of vehicles you're using. Are you actually utilizing the cubic space within the vehicle efficiently? Or do you have a lot of space above? You're actually transporting a lot of air, because that can all translate, of course, to excess cost. So make sure the vehicle size, if you like, is appropriate for the task that you're performing. So that's number 1. Kind of aligned to that is resource and task match. So make sure it's not just about capacity, but are the right sort of vehicles being used for your freight task? Whether it be sort of courier van deliveries or palletized freight deliveries. Make sure that either your own vehicles or your subcontracted carrier are using the right sort of vehicles to conduct your particular freight task. Because if there's a mismatch, there's probably going to be a cost implication to that. Number 3 is volume leveraging. I see this in probably more often in larger businesses. Let me give you an example, quite a shocking example. A very large national business that had 200 freight carriers. I kid you not, 200. How does that happen? Well, various divisions in the business or branches of the business or state head offices all have their relationships with different freight carriers, and it's built up over the years, and they deal with this one and they deal with this one, and suddenly you've got 200 freight companies you're trying to manage. So look at that, because firstly, it's a huge admin task, but secondly, you're probably not using that overall volume to get the best rates that you could. You imagine if you're going to 200 carriers and moving 10 pallets here and 50 pallets there, if you actually consolidated all of that volume and said, hey, we want to move 2,000 pallets a day, can you give us a good rate? That's really what volume leveraging is about. So have a look at the number of carriers that you're using. The next one is task integration. So what do I mean by that? The classic one that would probably make sense to you is return freight. So maybe you have lots and lots of freight going from A to B, but do you actually have freight coming from B back to A as well? So look as far as possible to utilize those vehicles on not just the outbound leg, but the return leg as well, backloading as we call it. And maybe you can be picking up from suppliers on the way back and those sorts of things. Maybe you have other freight tasks in other parts of the business that could utilize those same vehicles. So look at how you can actually leverage that fleet, those vehicles across other tasks. The next one is dedicated resources. So I guess I'd say that most companies would outsource all of their freight. It's not so fashionable these days. or so usual to have an in-house fleet, but it can be. And what I'm talking about there particularly is specialized vehicles. So think about things like cement haulage, bulk liquids, bulk food products like flour, rice, that kind of stuff. If you've got big volumes with basically just A to B, B to A, A to B, B to A, steady runs backwards and forwards, it can actually make a lot of sense to have dedicated vehicles, in-house vehicles even to do that. So dedicated vehicles could be third party or in-house. But where you can utilize the vehicles really well like that, almost on sort of circular trips, you can do some really good deals with third parties, or maybe even consider having those vehicles in-house and running them yourself. The next one is rate competitiveness. So remember I said right at the beginning, it's not about squeezing your freight carrier and trying to get them to go from $40 to $38 or whatever it might be. There's an element of that. I mean, obviously you want to check and make sure that your rates are not over market. But the other element is to look at the rate structure. So are you paying per pallet delivery, per ton delivery, per truck delivery, per drop? Understand those different rate types and make sure that they match your task and it makes sense to you and that it's driving the right behaviors for the freight company. That's the important thing. So make sure your rates are competitive in terms of the actual dollar rate as well as the rate structure. And then finally, contract terms. Have a look at, there's still a lot of freight in this country that's uncontracted. I'm not sure that's such a great idea, but have a look at the contract terms, things like the length of the contract. Obviously, if you've got really good rates, you might want to lock those in for a longer period. Look at things like, additional charges, things like demurrage charges, which is charges for waiting, for additional services, maybe, unloading at site with cranes, all those sort of things. Look at the entirety of the contract and all of the terms and make sure that you're not being disadvantaged there. So there you go, just a quick video this week, some of the things that we help our clients look for that you can start looking for yourself within your freight operations. And 7, I mean, we look at about 20 probably, but there's 7 of the really common ones to kind of tick off and make sure that you're doing those well. And best of luck with looking at your freight contracts. So that's it for this week. If you've got any questions, do please ask down below. As always, I try to get to those and answer those myself. But otherwise, thanks for watching and see you next week. Bye for now.